everything that runs around that judgment was rascally. Everything that runs around that judgment was badly thought out. Everything that runs around that judgment is against the spirit and intent of democracy. If you want INEC to deal with issues regarding deregistering political parties, you would wait until after a national election. If you didn't do that between 2023 and 2024, why, after candidates have emerged from these parties? You know my position. Anybody who researches my position knows. In one of the reactions to my last media outing, somebody said, oh, he has since joined Atiku. And Atiku must have had a laugh in his room because he knows I do not support his quest for the presidency. Not because he's from the north. Understand it. And I did not support Peter Obi in 2023 because he's from the southeast. I supported Peter Obi in 2023 because I checked through the cards. And in terms of decency, in terms of financial discipline and decorum, which of course is one of the challenging issues and decima in today's Nigeria, he came tops. Other issues regarding his leadership style and all that, I may not have known. But at that point, I supported him based on the facts that I hold dear.
All right, welcome to Naija Unfiltered, a symphony podcast. And our guest on today's edition of the program is someone you love to meet, a reporter's delight anytime, any day. He's Chris Nwaokobia Jnr., Convenor Country First Movement. It's a pleasure having you once again.
The pleasure is mine, Victor.
So much has happened in the polity, and as we approach the elections, and people are getting a little bit disturbed. Let's start with the reaction of Justice Peter Lifu's directive to INEC to deregister five political parties. What are your take?
No, the first thing was, when I heard the news, I asked myself three questions. Why is the judiciary interested in destroying democracy? And for what reason will a judge make that ruling when individuals, candidates have emerged from these parties and they're looking forward to an election in the next 5-6 months? And then the third one was, who's playing the tune? And to what end is this tune? Why are people unmindful of the fact that this democracy was fought with sorrow, tears, and blood by people? Why have they forgotten so soon the sacrifice of the patriarch of Abiola family, Chief Mko Abiola, and even his wife, Kudirat Abiola? And then, very unfortunately, why are these events happening in the month of the celebration of the freest and the fairest election in our historicity, the June 12th election? And then a few days after the memorial in honor of Kudirat, who was murdered on the June 4th, why are they desecrating the tomb, if you like, and the sacrifice of the doyens of our democracy? To what end is all this shenanigans? That's my first take. But I want to say here, and very clearly, that whoever is playing the drum for the justice has been grossly unfair, not only to the judiciary, but to our democracy for three very formidable reasons too. The first is that whatever the judge was banging on or hanging on to make that ruling does not have life, considering the status of the political parties that they deregistered or ordered INEC to deregister. The first thing is, as you and I talk, Victor, their court party has a governor. And the law frowns on retroactive action. As you and I talk, the ADC has over 6 senators and members of the House of Representatives. As you and I talk, Victor, very importantly, Zenith Labour Party has not only candidates, they won elective positions in the last election. I remember Dan and Wyan were talking about councillorship and chairmanship positions. And so, where and why the shenanigans? Very importantly also, is that praxis that we all grew up knowing, the witch cried last night and the child dies this morning. We hear that the body that went to court is sponsored, financed, and convened, if you like, by the chief of staff to the president. And they call themselves bodies of former lawmakers. So I don't know whether the chief of staff to the president understands that this ultimately may derail democracy. And like I asked on Sunday in your sister...
Is that on record, that they have been financed?
Yes, it's on record. It's on record.
The
He has
chief of
even
staff to the
attended their
president.
functions. They've given credence. There were members who were with him in the House of Reps when he was Speaker. They haven't denied. He hasn't denied them, and they haven't denied him. You know, and these are the challenges that for a lawyer, I expect the chief of staff to the president to speak up right now. And I expect those who care about our democracy to rise up now and condemn that abrasive action, condemn that brash ruling, condemn that illegal and unjustifiable position of the court.
And regrettably, the Court of Appeal had asked Justice Lifu to stay action on this case on May 22nd and scheduled hearing on this matter for October 27. You attempted to ask why the hurry.
Absolutely judicial rascality. But I call the brashness and the impunity a procured dance of macabre, a procured dance of shame, because you cannot overrule a higher court. By training as a lawyer, I know that courts defer to courts of higher jurisdiction, you know, and very unfortunately, you ask yourself, like I said, who's playing the tune? Why would a judge of the Federal High Court disobey flagrantly the posturing and the positioning of a Court of Appeal? And I will call the NJC, the National Judicial Commission, to rise with punitive measures against that judge. And I will also say that at this point, even those who superintend the APC must understand that, like Mr. President noted in his June 12 Democracy Day speech, that democracy suffers when you stifle the space for contestation, you stifle the space for dissent, when you stifle the space for the opposition to thrive. I believe, and I want to say, Victor, that everything that runs around that judgment is rascally. Everything that runs around that judgment was badly thought out. Everything that runs around that judgment is against the spirit and intent of democracy. If you want INEC to deal with issues regarding deregistering political parties, you would wait until after a national election. If you didn't do that between 2023 and 2024, why, after candidates have emerged from these parties? As you and I talk, in a few months, the Osun State Governor, Adeleke, who's running under their court party, will be going to the polls. What happens with that aspiration? With the order to deregister their court party? In a few months, Atiku Abubakar Rotimi ticket holds the presidential flag for the ADC, and they're preparing for the next election. What happens to that ticket? And what happens to the thousands of Nigerians who got paid for forms, went through the primaries across these 5 political parties? What happens to them? I think that the time has come for Nigerians to begin to think about country. You know, it was that inimitable quote of John F. Kennedy that comes to mind every time I think about Nigeria. And some people will ask me, is that where you got the name country first from? I said, my fellow Americans, think not what your country can do for you, but think what you can do for your country. The time has come for us, whether you be in the judiciary, whether you be a politician in the APC, the ADC, across political parties, whether you are of the civil society, wherever you are, the time has come for us to put country first. Because, Victor, if we continue to allow this shenanigans, this madness everywhere, we're all going to be the losers. Because if Nigeria is in trouble, nobody can sleep. If Nigeria gets into trouble, the whole of West Africa will be overrun in one day. And by Jove, Africa will be in a major mess and trouble. So the time has come for us to begin to think not necessarily about our egocentric tendencies, about our individual ambition. The time has come for us to begin to think about our country, the well-being of our people, and the democracy that so many fought for, some died for. Some of us were imprisoned for months, some for years, to get the military to go back to the barracks on the 29th day of May 1999. And 27 years after, I think that what we must do is collectively protect it and deepen the frontiers of democracy.
Let's look at the Attorney General of the Federation. A lot of persons felt he should ordinarily be a defendant in this case, but somehow he turned around to support the plaintiffs in this case. How do you respond to issues like this?
You know, there is something that bothers the carapace of my mind. Sometimes I ask myself, do these men really interrogate the frontiers, the width, the breadth, and the length, if you like, of these actions? Because you see, oftentimes we get carried away by emotions, by emotive reasoning, and by, quote unquote, the context, the conquest of politics. You know, some who have not sat down to think about how kingdoms fall, how nations fall, and how empires collapse, who have not come to think about why life is essentially a flux. Sit back and they're either singing on your mandate we stand, or thinking that to stifle dissent is the way to victory. And I think we must say to the AG, the Attorney General of the Federation, that the time to talk to those who, like you, worship at a temple of justice and tell them that one of the most formidable policies of the law is preservation of society, preservation of sanity, and preservation of the collective trust, in this case, the green, white, green, in this case, the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Now, why am I speaking so deeply, Victor? If you allow those who have bought forms across these political parties, if you allow those who have mobilized people, perhaps some with borrowed funds, towards their candidacy for 2027, to take laws, perhaps, into their hands, self-help, then our polity, and our politics is in trouble. And for whatever reason, if you think that your party is so powerful, why are you not allowing the opposition to thrive? I think that the time has come for us, Victor, to speak to the conscience of not only the Attorney General of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. The time has come for all of us to speak to the conscience of Mr. President and those who mind the presidency. It is to everybody's good that we allow the opposition to thrive. It is to everybody's good that we allow the deepening of the frontiers of democracy. It is to everybody's good that we allow free, fair, and credible elections come 2027. And that is because the Nigerian young people, those you call the Gen Z generation, are not only aware of what happens across the world, they understand their rights. We saw a tip of the iceberg when a few years ago we had the End SARS protestation. We saw another glimmer of the tendencies of these young people when in 2023 they chose a candidate, and against the thinking of conventional politics and politics, those who thought that they were just people who tweet, do social media engagements in their bedrooms, we saw the movement called the Obedient Movement and what they were able to do in 2023. Now, the reality before us, and this I hope they heed, I hope they listen, the reality before us is beyond the Obedient Movement. The reality before us is beyond political tendencies. The reality before us is beyond the politics, the day-to-day politics of the Nigerian state. The reality before us, Victor, is that we live in a society where the young feels abandoned and neglected, where the young is pauperized and defeated. I'm using strong words. Where the young, perhaps the young girl out there, does not have a suitor because the young man there does not have a job. And so she's bothered and angry with her nation. We live in a country where those who are paid and given minimum wage of 70,000 do not have 70,000 naira as a living wage. We live in a country where there's frustration and anger. We live in a country where poverty, disease, and decay has become prevalent. And we live in a country where the young people are saying we must have our right to say no. And our right to choose who governs us must be defended. And so we're living in a society that is angrier in 2026 than they were in 2020. A society that is angrier in 2026 than they were in 2023. So what I beg of our political class, indiscriminate of whether you are in rulership or leadership or whether you are in the opposition, is to understand that the urgency of now calls for a society that not only defends the rights of our citizens, protects the democratic space, and ensures that as we march towards 2027, we give to people that place where they can trust the democratic process. So I'm asking Latif Fagbemi, the senior advocate of Nigeria, who is the Attorney General of the Federation, to speak to those who worship at the Temple of Justice with him. You know, coincidentally, Victor, this might make you laugh. The judgment came the same day when the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria was commissioning the new Court of Appeal building. The judgment came the same day when he was reading a paragraph that talked about the need for speedy administration of justice and that modern justice must be fair, free, and indiscriminate of class, gender, or place in the society. And very unfortunately, a judge of the Federal High Court decides to say, no, you're wrong, Mr. Vice President. Justice must listen to my whims and caprices. Justice must oblige my paymaster's position. But I think that the time has come for us to say to everyone who's involved, whether you're of the presidency, or you're of the opposition, or you're with us in the civil society, wherever you are, the time to understand that we all will suffer if Nigeria collapses. and that we all will gain if Nigeria thrives and succeeds is now.
All right, let's look at the implications of if INEC goes ahead to successfully deregister these 5 political parties. Just for the sake of argument, what are the likely implications if INEC goes ahead to deregister ADC and the other 4 political parties?
Victor, I hope that if never happens. Because I will tell you, Victor, that much as I've expressed my disappointment with the way primaries were conducted across the parties, both the ruling parties and the parties in the opposition, much as I've registered my disappointment with the general shenanigans that surrounded the politics of party primaries, I am one of those who will step out to the streets, not minding how my leg hurts. And I believe that the Nigerian people will pour out to the streets. I believe that this government will see the kind of uproar, the kind of anger never seen since the days of agitation for the revalidation of June 12. And I'm saying it deeply because I understand what is playing out before us. Victor, you wonder. Each party has well over 2,000 candidates that were emerged from the ward level to the local government level to the state level and to the presidential level, National Assembly and presidential election. Each party. All of these 5 parties, most of them have presidential candidates already, are you aware? Most of them have candidates across boards. And you just unilaterally, out of nowhere, decide to deregister. I think Josh Amopiton and those who are playing the drums for them do not mean well for him and the INEC. And they must understand that, well, I've heard that the parties are going to exhaust the legal avenues open to them and that they will appeal the ruling. I hope and pray that Joash Amopito does not do what he did when he quickly, in utter dismay, even himself being a senior advocate of Nigeria, went ahead to remove the name of the leadership of ADC from the portal because of a certain ruling. I hope he does not quickly do that because it will deal the greatest damage not only to his INEC, but his reputation. I believe that even a greenhorn, a new wig, even a law student in school understands that what the judge who ruled for the deregistering of the 5 political parties did was wrong. Every lawyer knows that. And why a judge will do that, I still can't understand. And I hope that the INEC chairman, being a professor of law, pinches himself. They shouldn't use him to destroy democracy. Because should he deregister those political parties, he will not only have Nigerians pour out to the streets, he will have the entire world lampoon and disparage him as a man without scruples. He will have the entire space, democratic space, lampoon his candidate, his person as the chairman of the INEC. And then, interestingly, the security arm of government will have so much to chew. Because you see, the Nigerians already are disgusted with the level of insecurity in the country. Nigerians are troubled with the level of hunger, pain, penury, and pangs in our collective space. Nigerians generally are troubled because people are losing jobs by the day. Small businesses are closing shop because they can't afford fuel to power their businesses. People are troubled enough that all they want is to be allowed to express their political decision and desire come 2027. And there are some whose aspiration, whose individual hope is tied to the candidates who have emerged across these 5 political parties. And to say to those people who are troubled, who are worried, who are despondent, that their candidates cannot run because a certain judge ruled that the parties be deregistered is to say the least reprehensible. And so I think that that your conjecture is not possible. I think that, I know you're playing the devil's advocate, but I think it's impossible. I think that not even in the wildest of the imaginations of Joash Amopiton will he deregister any party. I think it's impossible. And something tells me that it's impossible. You know, it's impossible. No man walks into a burning flame with his eyes open. Nobody does that. And so I hope that Joash Amopiton and those who are with him understands the urgency and the reality of now.
Do you think these people care?
I'll tell you something, Victor. I'm a student of history, proudly so, and a student of revolutionary processes, proudly so. Victor, Mahatma Gandhi said something, that there comes to a time when even the devil has a conscience. And my mentor, Martin Luther King Jr., would say that oftentimes in history, people will tell you, is it possible? It is not possible. And that the difference between it is the urgency of the moment. Maybe if you'd asked me if they care 5, 6 years ago, I could have doubts. But with the reality of now, if they don't care, then something must be wrong with them. And I'm saying this without doubts. If they don't care, Victor, you wake up and you hear that thousands of people are on the streets in Lagos. Just 3 days ago, a senior advocate of Nigeria brought out over 30,000 Nigerians to the streets of Lagos. Femi Falana. Same day, the young man, VDM, brought out thousands of people to the streets in Abuja. Across the country, there are protestations calling for the release of our young brothers and sisters who were taken away in Oyo, some in Borno, some in Zamfara, and you'd think it's a joke? The whole polity is so badly heated up, Victor. I'm not an emotional student. I'm not emotive in my logic. I just face it. This country and this government can ill afford heating up the polity more than it already is. It cannot. Anybody who thinks that it is possible to overlook the urgency of now must have that brain re-examined. Perhaps the person is high on some narcotic. Because I think that Nigeria is so charged, as you and I talk, that I'm even worried. I'll give you a practical story. My mom is an American citizen. She lives in America. She's about 80. I was speaking with my mom a few days ago, and what was her advice to a 55-year-old man? Dumebi, that's my native name. Be careful about where you go to. Be careful about what you do. I hear that's how bad it is. Everyone who's talking to you from the diaspora thinks that this house is on fire already. So anybody who tells you that they don't care must also have his or her brain examined, because those who think that it does not matter must have something wrong somewhere. You don't look at a country that is heated up in every respect. There's hunger, disease, and decay. There's abrasive insecurity. And you know what bothers me? The new business after fraud in leadership is kidnap for ransom across the Nigerian space, not just Northeast, North Central, or Northwest. Everywhere in the country is kidnap for ransom as the second biggest business after government. That's how tragic it has become. And then as you and I talk, those who are saying that we have an alternative, you're saying to them you cannot pursue your calling through a reckless ruling of a court, and you think that INEC will wake up and say, oh, a court said we should deregister, and just like that? It's impossible, Victor. I think that some people, unfortunately, are unaware that there is a loose gasoline tank somewhere, and the right to keep it shut and locked up simply depends on how responsible and responsive leadership and government is. And to do otherwise is to allow an implosion, either from outside or an explosion across the political space. So I think that everyone who truly cares about our country, like yours sincerely would say, must rise up to say to Mr. President, ask those who are around you to stop the shenanigans, and ask the judiciary to stay true to justice, and ask those who perhaps court jesters and a bit of or senseless partisan to understand that Nigeria will be better off if you allow the opposition to thrive. And if we go to the 2027 contestation, electoral contestation, as brothers contesting ideas and ideals, rather than people who are ready to pull a dagger or put a bullet through the throat or the neck of any other person. I think that the time has come for us to understand that if we allow the process to us until 2027 to be free, fair, and credible, Nigeria will be better off for it.
Let's step out from the court and the political parties that the court is asking to be deregistered. Let's look at the broader political environment. The ADC has picked Rotimi Amaechi as its vice presidential candidate. What's the assessment and what's your take?
Victor, I still think that something will happen somewhere. I still hope that the opposition will understand the urgency of now. I told you the last time I was with you that my greatest commitment now is project vote competency and capacity. And what informs that is the fact that I want to see leaders, true leaders, sincere leaders emerge on our political kaleidoscope. And what do I simply mean? I want to see men who can sacrifice their individual needs, ambition, and ego for the collective good. Standing clearly on what is visible and obvious. If we have 1920 presidential candidates running against President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, it's obvious he will win landslide. It's obvious. I don't care what people say about this. It doesn't mean that I like him. It means that I'm being realistic and I'm thinking about the need to have a country that works. If you have an Atiku Abubakar on the ballot with Rotimi Amaechi as his running mate, if you have a Peter Obi on the ballot with Kwakwanso as a running mate, if you have my big brother and friend, Benga Olawekbo Hashim, on the ballot, if you have my brother Shore on the ballot, if you have several other eggheads on the ballot, all contesting against one president that is allegedly a non-performer, you're invariably saying, oh, continue. Because the truth is that you will divide the votes saying we do not want President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to continue. All those voters will vote across these tendencies, and all those who want Bola Ahmed Tinubu to continue will vote for him. So clearly, logically, you're saying we want President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to come back. That is why I'm unable to assess the individual candidates in the opposition. I think, like I prayed the last time I was here, and I've written several times and I've spoken about this reality in several sister stations of yours. I've said that I will turn out boldly to support any candidate in the opposition, when the opposition meets to realize that we need a formidable candidate who can go to the polls against President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. That was exactly what Bola Ahmed Tinubu did in supporting Buhari in 2015. Understanding that if you have so many strong candidates coming out from the opposition, they will divide the votes of the opposition, and President Jonathan will return in 2015. They coalesced around around the candidacy of Muhammadu Buhari, and that was how in 2015 Jonathan was defeated. If we truly want a new order other than the present, we must meet. It is not too late to do that. And I've said clearly, and I'm saying it here, Victor, that I will continue to nudge that understanding until the month of September. When in the month of September, the opposition does not understand the urgency of now and the reality, then along with those who believe with me that the time to vote competency and capacity is now, we'll reevaluate the issues and we'll tell Nigerians what we think. Because you see, every time I discuss with eggheads and those who truly care about our country, what we pray is that something gives. I talk to broadcasters and they say, I pray something gives. I talk to men in the military, they say, we pray something gives. I talk to people who are in the civil society and they say they pray something gives. And I have tried to interrogate what this something gives connotes. And in my simple understanding, it's either of two things. It's either the opposition understands the reality and coalesces, or for me, my wish is either that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu wakes up to the urgency of now and decides to ensure that the security challenges across this country is dealt with. I'm not one of those who hate any candidate. I don't. And that's why I've told people, a few days ago, I was on a sister station and people, rather than address the fundamental issues of my dialectics and debate, were saying, oh, he has abandoned Peter Obi. Peter Obi knows that I haven't abandoned him. I haven't abandoned any politician. I have abandoned everyone who doesn't understand that the urgency of now is to build a country that works for the masses of our people. I'll debate any human being about that urgency, and I will fight for that reality. That's why I suffered under IBB, I suffered under Abacha, and I've continued to fight for an egalitarian society. I'm not emotional. I'm not one of those who will listen to a raging mob who does not understand our story and our history. We have fought for a country that works, and we will continue to fight for a country that works. I'm not one of those who will come to the media to say horrible things about people that I know nothing about. I make you laugh. You know my position. Anybody who researches my position knows. In one of the reactions to my last media outing, somebody said, oh, he has since joined Atiku. And Atiku must have had a laugh in his room because he knows I do not support his quest for the presidency. Not because he's from the north. Understand it. And I did not support Peter Obi in 2023 because he's from the southeast. I supported Peter Obi in 2023 because I checked through the cards. And in terms of decency, in terms of financial discipline and decorum, which of course is one of the challenging issues and decima in today's Nigeria, he came tops. Other issues regarding his leadership style and all that, I may not have known. But at that point, I supported him based on the facts that I hold dear. The reason I cannot support an Atiku Abubakar is fundamentally generational connect. And he knows what I mean. Number two, we must wake up to the point where we can tell Nigerians that the young can actually aspire. And then number three, Atiku hasn't proven to me, I'm a leadership tutor, that he has done well as a leader. A true leader can mentor people who can carry along and move forward with his aspirations. Remember, maybe if Nelson Mandela were a Nigerian, after one term as president of South Africa, people will go singing "On Your Mandate We Stand for Him" and asking him, just like they have done with Biya in Cameroon, that is the Almighty. I think that leaders should be able to mentor people. And that's where I have a problem, Victor. I feel led by the universe to say this. Every candidate who is running for Senate, who has been a governor, governed the state for 8 years or for 4 years, and you wake up after that and you want to be a senator, after having been an executive governor of a state, you want to be a lawmaker representing 1/3 of the state. For 8 years, you couldn't tutor one person who can go to the Senate to represent your constituency. I think they're all failures. Let me say this and let posterity hold me responsible for this declaration. Let me say it now. There's no need hiding it. So everybody who comes to politic about the salvation of Nigeria, I look at you and ask myself, you were governor for 8 years. You superintended over the state with executive powers, and you ask your people to give you mandate to go back to the National Assembly, 1/3 of the state, to represent them. So for 8 years that you were governor, you couldn't find somebody in your constituency to mentor and make sure he carries the flag to the Senate. That's a failure. People should stop grandstanding about their commitment to democracy. Anybody who does that is either beholden of power and the largesse of power, or beholden of ego, aids, and egocentricity, or beholden to the perks of office, corruption, and fraud. There is no other logic. Leaders, great leaders must show the way. Great leaders must train people. Anybody who has governed the state for 8 years, Victor, and wants to come to the Senate because that's what they've turned the Senate to, a retirement center, a retirement home, is not sincere, is not a sincere leader. Nigerians must understand that and confront that reality. People should stop gaslighting Nigerians. And the time has come for young people to begin to interrogate this. I don't care.
All right, the NDC is facing a measure of internal crisis. And the first media appearance of the national leader of the party, Senator Seriake Dickson, on one of the television programs centered around those issues. But at the end of that appearance, so much came out, including what a lot of persons have perceived to be presenting himself as having a larger-than-life posture than even his presidential and the vice presidential candidates, especially when he asks questions about who is more qualified than me. And a lot of persons are saying that was paradise lost, an opportunity to market the party, market his presidential candidate, and not an opportunity for comparison. What do you make of that?
Any candidate, anybody who is in the Senate, who was governor for 8 years, cannot come to me to tell me about his sense of decorum, decency, and dignity. I won't listen. I see him like one of those who is beholden to power, beholden to clear lights, one of those who have a drum major issue. And that's what it is. You saw that interview. I saw it. And I said to myself, oh, wonder, let's suppose that the NDC produces the next president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. You know the kind of problem the party will have with the leadership? He was invariably, I am the alpha and omega of a party. I call the shots. I'm more qualified than my vice presidential candidate. I'm more qualified than he was. I'm doing them a favor. You know, and I sit back to look at the politics and the politics of our country. I look at the optics. Victor, have you wondered why in almost 6 weeks I haven't written an article? What I was doing almost every week. It came to a point, and I say this without equivocation, that I was getting largely despondent. It came to a point where I wake up and my heart is heavy and I can't write. It came to a point where looking at the whole process of the primaries of the parties, where those who should show an example of rectitude and decency lost that opportunity, and my heart was broken. And then when I see the defense, the lame defense of the failings and the failures, I ask myself, are we truly ready for democracy? I wonder what they think of democracy. And when I listen to that part where he disparaged the obedience, I know the obedience can be a lot of trouble. I've been a victim of their troubles sometimes. I remember once I told you that when the last Edo State general elections, governorship elections happened, and I thought that citizen, Asue Gudalo, was the best of a candidate, I said to them, if we truly love Edo, we should ask Akpata to step down for Asue Gudalo and ensure that we take Edo to greater heights. Even citizen, I have it on tape, citizen Peter Obi, I still have the tape, admitted that Asue Gudalo was a fantastic candidate, but said he wasn't going to leave his party. Now, that again comes to the issues about partisanship and competency and capacity, and that's a debate for another day. But what is important for me as you and I talk is the fact that, like I said to the minders of a president, to talk to him about how not to hedge in the judiciary to destroying our democracy, I will say to the minders and those who are close to the NDC leader, Senator Seriake Dickson, to ask him to put his ego and his seeming larger-than-life ambience and tendencies on check. Because whatever you think, the presidential candidate of a party, having given him the ticket, is higher than you are. He's the alter ego of a party in a presidential contestation. That's the truth. And so whether you were or you are potentially the strongest person, the truth is that we're talking about a presidential democracy, not a parliamentary system where it's first amongst equals. No. And if tomorrow Peter Obi emerges the president, he becomes your leader. So I think that Nigerians should learn to put country first. Again, that's the way to go. I have seen the ricochet effect of a poorly conducted primaries and the hoopla that attended it. I have friends who wanted the ticket, who were very strong and credible candidates, and they didn't get it. I sympathize with them. I understand that party primaries can be a lot of trouble in Nigeria, but I also think that those who pretend this party should be humble enough to admit their errors, plead with people to understand that things can be done better than arrogant dismissal of pungent assessments of their mistakes. And then going forward, Victor, I will say to our young people out there who are observing the politics of our country to understand that the time to rise beyond partisanship, to assessing individuals and candidates based on their capacity and competencies now. And I say this advisedly. You may have a fantastic candidate in the worst of parties, and that's because the Nigerian political system and partisan system is simply like a multi-purpose vehicle. Everybody needs a political vehicle by which and through which to run for election. Not necessarily because these parties are ideological. And so what is important is research the candidate and support the best candidate wherever and in whichever party you find them. That's the way to go. Until we learn to do that, our search for a republic that works for the good of all will be like the wait for Godot.
President Tinubu's Democracy Day speech on June 12th has been receiving a lot of backlash. A lot of Nigerians feel that he's living in alternate realities. In terms of his positions, the economic realities are not matching at all. Of course, that the speech lacked accountability for unfulfilled promises, failing to address worsening national security situation in the country. How do you assess that's a Democracy Day speech in the light of some of these issues, economic and promises made and not fulfilled, and of course, issue of security?
No, the first thing I must say is that what I expected Mr. President to do was address simply issues that border on our democracy. He lost the opportunity on the 29th of May to tell us or to properly reveal or release his scorecard to the Nigerian people, because his third year in power was actually 29th of May, 2026. And so I thought that on the 12th of June, 2026, our dear president would have told us how democracy has fared and what he's going to be doing about ensuring that the 2027 general election becomes the freest and the fairest in our historicity. Because what we did on the 12th of June was to celebrate 33 years of the freest and the fairest election in our historicity. So what I thought Mr. President was going to do was basically tell Nigerians the effort and the commitment of government to ensuring that the 2027 general election will be the freest and the fairest in our historicity. Well, unfortunately, he lost that opportunity. And I largely agree with most Nigerians, what was missing beyond that was the fact that the data and statistics our dear president threw up in that speech were largely false. You don't tell Nigerians with the spate of insecurity that you have dealt massively with insecurity. That was a huge lie. And Victor, I've always told you that my late father taught me that petting issues that border on truth is acceding a lie, supporting a lie. And then, my son, if you don't want to call it a lie, then don't even address it. So if you ask me, Mr. President is aware that it is a lie to tell Nigerians that they have done well with fighting insecurity. Mr. President knows that it is a lie to tell Nigerians that they are better off today than when you took over. Mr. President knows that it is a lie to tell Nigerians that Nigerians feel safer today than ever. The truth is that Nigerians, I just told you about what my mom told me, tried to caution me all the way from the US about where I go to, a 55-year-old man. Nobody would do that 10 years ago, But that tells you how bad it has become. Every day, in the Southwest, most traditional rulers have abandoned their kingdoms. That's how bad it is. In the North, people do not go to farms because they are scared, and that's why you have food insecurity, food shortage. It's a terrible tragedy. And I think, and that's what I told you, Victor, that what can give? Mr. President should go back to the drawing board with his team and look at these issues frontally. Ask his people to tell him the whole truth and advise him how to make magical impact in the next few months. Other than that, Nigerians are tired of wry and false data and statistics. I listened to a very formidable economist, Rewane, recently, and he was saying that, Bismarck Rewane, and he was saying that what bothers him as a professional is the fact that the massive disconnect between the macroeconomic figures and the microeconomic reality defeats logic and defies sane prognosis. That's how bad it is. And people will come to politic with it. We've come to a nadir where people politic with matters of insecurity. We've come to a terrible nadir where people politic with the welfare and the well-being of the Nigerian people. We've come to a horrible nadir where government prides in falsehood and debauchery. We've come to a horrible nadir where issues about patriotism is lacking. And I think that Mr. President should and must fire that speechwriter, because it did not convey the mood of the nation. It did not address the mood of the nation. And I expected our dear president to strongly take responsibility for our missing children, because that happened about the same period. That's, I expected our dear president, if you must address issues about your government and governance on Democracy Day, June 12th, then tell us that government is taking strong responsibility for the kids missing from Oyo State, that government is taking strong responsibility for the people who were negotiating peace in Zamfara, but ended up the 50 others who were abducted in Zamfara. Tell Nigerians that you admit that things have gone to a terrible situation, but the government is rising up. Don't tell us that things are getting better when we know that things are not getting better. That's where I have a problem with the minders of this presidency. There's nothing wrong in telling your people that things are sordid and terribly bad, but that was why I was elected. And I'm a president who will attend to them. I remember that great speech of Winston Churchill during the Second World War, when bombs were coming up from Germany into the United Kingdom, when submarines were coming in from Germany and blowing up the cities. And he stood up and said to the people of Britain that we have come through this, and we know that we must, through sorrow, tears, and blood, pull through this, that we must commit ourselves to ensuring that the government of the people, for the people, and by the people must not depart from the face of the earth. Take responsibility, and strongly so. That's the way you put the terrorists, the brigands, the bandits, the villains, and the terrorists on check. You don't beg them. Oh, government is saying to you, you have to surrender your arms because you may not have another day. You didn't even give it time. Let me remind you, when the bandits, when terrorism and the militants of the Niger Delta were holding the nation's economy by the jugular, it was Umaru Yar'Adua who he gave a date. I think it was 4th of October. He said, if by the 4th of October you do not surrender arms, I will blow down all the creeks. And I remember that on the 2nd or 3rd, Tompolo, who was the last general, quote unquote, standing, gave up. When government rises to the urgency and the challenge, the people will comply. That was why Abacha would say that any insurrection or insurgency that survives a month, that government...
It's not even a month, 48 hours.
You know that government has its hand in it. And look at the picture, the optics from from Katsina State. Somebody called me and said, a very good friend of mine, and said, so who delivered the corpse of the retired general? And so where are the people who delivered the corpse? And I said, I don't know. The corpse flew from the forest, because it's unimaginable that the corpse came and those who had a retired general die in custody, in captivity, dropped his corpse and went back. That's a complicity of government and those who pretend this era that I cannot explain. So I think that the time has come for our dear president and the minders of the presidency to rise up to the urgency of now. Truth elevates, falsehood diminishes, and that speech was full of falsehood.
Okay, let's wrap up this way, still on insecurity. What's the assessment or your take on the general handling of the worsening insecurity in the land?
Victor, let me say very clearly that every time I hear about one death or one kidnap, something in me gives. I don't know whether you remember I told you that I lost my younger sister to kidnappers in Delta State.
Sure.
So a part of me gives. And understanding that It has become a daily trajectory, bothers me immensely. It reminds me, puts my wound and my pain right in front of me. Understanding the trauma, because I felt it, that people go through, it makes me bleed. And I want to say that the time has come for us to remove this issue from day-to-day political debates. Government must rise to the urgency of now. The buck stops at the table of the president. Whether you're standing on his mandate or not, you must say that truth. The reason leaders emerge is to take responsibility. And the reason Mr. President asked to be the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, knowing that the primary responsibility of leadership is protection of life and property, cannot be denied. So we must understand that it is either there is a disconnect between the security apparatus and leadership instructions, or there is a complicity of segments of the political class and leadership with the non-state actors that are haranguing and harassing our nation, or there is a general conspiracy by leadership to allow all of us suffer. And that's my basic assessment of it. I think that the way to go, if our dear president cares about this country, is to rise up to the challenge and the urgency of now. There's no excuse for the death and custody or captivity of Nigerians. There's no excuse. Nothing excuses it. And you know, it was this Norman Vincent Paul who said that the death of one man diminishes me because we're a part of the whole. Therefore, do not ask of me for who the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. When one man dies, we all die. You know, because we're a part of a planet, a part of the whole. You know, I think that the time has come for Nigerians and political operators, whether you're the APC or the opposition, to say the truth. It's a shame that Nigerians cannot go to bed with their eyes closed. It is a shame that you cannot travel without fear on our roads. It's a tragedy of sorts that government blames the opposition or blames politics for the rising insecurity in the land. It's a shame. And we must urge and nudge leadership to rise to the challenge. I don't understand why non-state actors can overawe a nation. I don't understand why non-state actors can be taking Nigerians into captivity at will. And so I think that now is the time to begin to put this as a template in the public, that there is no excuse for the increase in insecurity. There is no excuse for Nigerians not to feel safe in their homeland. There is no excuse whatsoever. And so those who excuse it are enemies of Nigeria, and those who politic with it are enemies of Nigeria. Those who think that they can look the other way are enemies of Nigeria. Going forward, I do sincerely believe, Victor, that the media, the civil society, and the political class must rise to that challenge and learn to say to politicians, there is no excuse to deny the fact that the primary responsibility for which leadership exists is to protect us. And now is a time for government to stop giving us platitudes and the regular we will, we shall. Now is the time for us to see government in action and government protecting and keeping Nigerians and Nigeria safe.